I will start us off. All right, here we go. I am Anne Choquette, CEO of The List. I am so proud to have another amazing list author that we can help launch her book into the world. Um, Liz Greenwood is a beloved member of the list, and has been working on this amazing book, Everyday Intuition, that really she's come to talk to us a little bit about it in the community and to really help us figure out how to harness our intuition, but also understand the difference between what is just crazy anxiety, which we are all feeling now, and what is actually our bodies, our minds, our feelings giving us a signal. And so this entire book, she has done a like tapped into her deep journalistic background to help explore who and why and how we are unlocking our everyday intuition. Carolyn Murnick is her fearless moderator today, also an amazing author, also a beloved member of the list. And also I really am enjoying your headphones right now,
Thank
actually.
you.
Great that looks. I am going to get out of the way and continue to let people in. I will be in the chat adding links to buy the book if you haven't bought the book yet. And if you have questions as we go, feel free to put them in the chat and I will help surface them at the end. All right, over to you, Carolyn and Elizabeth.
Thank you so
Thank,
much, Anne.
thank you, Anne. Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to chat today and hear from Liz and learn more about her book and hopefully leave everybody with a couple of tips on how you too can harness your own everyday intuition. So, Liz, I would love to start and hear from you about what sparked this book and tell us a little bit about your journey to getting it out in the world.
Yeah, thanks. So I've always been interested in intuition because it seems like one of these shared experiences that as humans we all possess. Yet it's kind of hard to pin down what it is, but it's like when you can't miss it when it happens, but what is that? So I was really interested in just getting to know and unpack more about what exactly is happening when that happens. I really started thinking about this quite a bit in 2018 when I became pregnant with my first kid. And as you might all recall, that was the first Trump administration when things felt like they were really falling apart. And it seems like, institutions and facts that we'd come to just take for granted of the world no longer really applied. And then, cut to today. So I was really interested in what if, the greatest authority actually comes from within? What if what we can really trust is ourselves? And what does it look like to stop outsourcing that authority to other people? And, of course, being pregnant and becoming a mom, I was really put in my body in this kind of like non cognitive flow of information, very embodied knowledge that I'd never experienced before. And I was thinking a lot about my own mother in becoming a mother and her mother, who are very intuitive people, and yet have also struggled with trusting themselves for a lot of different reasons. My mom's mom grew up Mennonite. My mom grew up in a Mennonite adjacent religion where like inner authority from women is not really like a major tenet of that religion. So that has been a conflict for them. And I was really interested in it was really kind of like this homecoming in a way, trying to figure out what is intuition, what is anxiety, why is it so easy for us to talk ourselves out of what we truly know.
I love that. So I want you to share a little bit about your journalism and, authorship background with the group here because Liz really has some impressive authorial chops, and you've written multiple books about faking your own death and about people in relationship with incarcerated people. And now we have intuition. So I would love to hear from you. Do you see any through line in these projects, or how would you define your oeuvre right now?
My central theme is paradox and paradoxical human experiences. So, with Playing Dead, A Journey Through the World of Death Fraud, that book is about the question of, could you die and stay alive in this lifetime? What does that look like? Love in the Time of Incarceration, about people who pursue relationships with the incarcerated. Can you find freedom and love in confinement, in the most horrible and inhumane of circumstances? And this book, as I alluded to before, is really about what does inner authority and self-trust look like? What if the most accurate and meaningful, purposeful information is actually really subtle and subjective and hard to parse apart sometimes, and in particular and idiosyncratic and individual. So that's my whistling Dixie answer that it's all about paradox, but really I don't know, I just drawn to these corners of human experience that do seem kind of fringe at first, but they're also the funhouse mirror to most everything. Playing Dead, that's a lot about delusion and self-deception, and we all experience that. Love in the Time of Incarceration, in part, is about putting ourselves in untenable situations. We all do it. And intuition, we've all got it. So, yeah.
I love that. And then I also read in a recent interview you did that this is the first book that you don't feel imposter syndrome about, either in the writing process or talking about. So can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think part of it just has to do with having done it now a few times. I mean, I started writing Playing Dead in my 20s, so I was like, I'm not smart enough.
Yeah.
And I'm 42 years old now. So I don't know. I feel like I've gotten over that a lot. And I think that the problems one experiences when writing a book, I just don't kind of take it as personally as I once did, where it's really hard to grab people's attention and it's hard to get coverage and like on and on and on, all that stuff of, just living in the 21st century. And also, like, I just had so much fun with this book, and I really stretched myself and my skill set quite a bit. And I just really believe in what I discovered. So I think it's more than anything, I'm just excited to share it with people so I can get out of my own way a little bit and let some of these, tools and techniques hopefully benefit people.
So I know, one of the initial questions that you had in the writing process was, how do we distinguish between anxiety and intuition? Can you share more about what you learned? How do you sum that up?
Yes. So I know that not everyone experiences anxiety and intuition as, in the same Venn diagram, but so let me explain what I mean first. I think what I mean is the feeling of like, you're supposed to go to a party or something, and you get a really strong feeling of like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I'm supposed to go to the party. Maybe I should just stay home. So, this kind of like premonition warning thing that feels like there's some kind of force out there trying to protect you from doom and destruction. So, that's kind of what I'm getting at when I'm talking about anxiety and intuition. And what I discovered about them is that it's so funny because now when I talk about this, I'm like, how did I ever think they were similar? Because they're actually, from what I can tell from talking to a lot of different people from a lot of different walks of life, they are quite distinct. And a few frameworks you can use to really disambiguate them is the kind of tone and tenor of how this intuition or anxiety is showing up. Anxiety is very immediate. It cannot hang out in uncertainty. It wants resolution, it wants answers, and it wants the now. So whenever you're kind of on the fence about and like feeling, like there's a gun to your head to make a decision, that's never intuition. That's always anxiety. Intuition is a little more quiet, a little more subtle, a little more just like a nudge, kind of a hand on your shoulder, whereas anxiety is just trying to like push you down the stairs. So I think that the tone is really important. And then I hammer on this in the book a lot, but I think becoming experts in ourselves and in our own patterns is really crucial also to distinguishing between them. How does anxiety show up for you? When are you an unreliable narrator? What are the buckets of human experience that really make you cuckoo? Like for me, travel is one. I'm always convinced that my flight's going to be canceled and the hotel's going to lose my
Mm-hmm.
reservation and blah, blah, blah. So that's a way too, is just really knowing thyself is and checking yourself. Remembering to check yourself is really important.
Mm-hmm. And then, building on that, in the book, you talk about sort of the different delivery systems that we can tune into in our body to start to figure out kind of where our intuition is showing up for us. And you talk about the clairs. And so I would love for you to explain a little bit about what that means. And then for anyone listening, if you are curious, I would love to hear if any of these clairs are resonating for you in particular, like, oh, this is the way I actually feel intuition. Put that in the chat and let's see kind of what the breakdown is of this room of kind of how our intuition is showing up for us. So can you talk us through
Yes.
the clairs?
Certainly. So the clairs, this is kind of from what the more woo-woo side of things. I do now come to understand woo-woo as a derogatory and misogynistic term. I'd
Mm-hmm.
love to say more about that. But we all know what we're talking about when we say woo-woo. So the clairs are different ways in which you receive intuitive information. The one that's we've all probably heard of is clairvoyance, which of course means like seeing the future, but also means just that you get intuitive signals, messages, what have you, in images. So I think of them more akin to learning styles than like hard and fast,
Mm-hmm.
rigid categories. So perhaps you're more of a visual learner, and maybe you would receive your intuitive downloads in images. I also think clairvoyance can mean being open to signs, signals, just visual information in your field. Um, Clairsentience, you feel it in your body. Clair empathy, meaning that you can really feel other people's emotions, being very sensitive to other people's moods. And you might experience clairsentience as getting an intuitive feeling of, maybe you have a meeting with a potential collaborator and you just feel something very strongly in your body. Clair intellect and clear cognizance, these are kind of overlap, but it's very like in your head. You're kind of just get the intuitive message in a sentence, verbally, as a kind of complete idea. What are the other ones? Am I missing any? Does anyone know them? Those are the big ones, I think.
Yeah.
And
Clear
there's a
audience.
little,
Clear audience is when you hear, get things odd. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Thanks, Anne. Clear gooses. That's a fun. There's one with smelling. Yeah, some people, particularly like psychics, mediums. I interviewed for this book. They will, oh, if they're having a session with someone, they will sometimes smell things, and that's how they get like their
Mm.
psychic information. So pretty
Mm-hmm.
cool.
So that brings us to all the people you interviewed for the book. There are a lot of them. You have neuroscientists, psychologists, gastroenterologists, ER doctors, psychics, mediums, all sorts of healers. I would love to hear who are some of the favorite people you met along this journey of
Oh
discovery.
man, I met so many great people. And it's funny, I feel I've heard people talk about grief that happens when their books get published. And I was like, what? Like, this is the fun part. But I really get it now because it's like the letting go where I'm like, gosh, I'm just not going to get to cold email people anymore out
Mm,
of the blue and say, tell me about intuition, because it was so much fun. So I interviewed an evolutionary psychologist named John Barge. He's out of Yale, and he blew my mind. Like just his understand, he's like a really radical thinker about unconscious processes. And I'll give you one really fun little tidbit he shared with me. So We often think about the unconscious. He corrected me. I said the unconscious. He was like, no, the unconscious. It's unconscious processes. And I was like,
Mm,
okay. We've often heard of this metaphor of like the iceberg, that conscious experience is the tip of the iceberg and unconscious experience is 90% of it. And he said, no, the iceberg does not work. That is too static. He said, unconscious processes are more like dolphins. It comes in, out of the water, above the line, and then goes back in. So consciousness and unconsciousness are always in conversation with each other. One is always informing the other. And it's more of a dance than just this hierarchical thing. So that was really cool.
mm,
And then, oh my gosh, yeah, psychics, mediums, witches, you name it. Just like a lot of really historians, sociologists, just really, really interesting people.
mm. Okay. Um, Now you touched on this idea of the woo-woo and that it's a term that's often coupled with misogyny in a lot of arenas, and also this idea of women's intuition. So I know some of the book you explore kind of the gender um, implications of this world of intuition and how historically that's one of the reasons that it's been discounted. So I would love to hear more from you about women's intuition and what you learned, and also that study that you mentioned at your event the
Sure.
other day. I thought was so fascinating.
So fascinating. So Women's Intuition question mark is the name of that chapter. And the study I mentioned that Carolyn's referring to is a study that paired men and women heterogeneously in pairs, where there was a leader and a subordinate, and there were male leaders, women leaders, female leaders. Where it didn't matter; they were all heterogeneous pairings. And what they found was that the subordinate always had to have more awareness and intuition about the superior than vice versa, suggesting that intuition is much more about positionality than about anything inborn in a gender way. So people who just have less social capital, marginalized groups are always going to have more awareness around the dominant group. So that was really
Mm-hmm.
interesting. But I think that this seeing, one of the questions I pursued in that chapter is, why does intuition have this feminine valence to begin with? Where does that even come from? And there are two places in history that happen within few hundred years of each other where I think this really gets solidified and codified. And the first is in the Middle Ages with the witch hunts, which, as you may know, were the church's way of just trying to consolidate power and get rid of any other religion, thought system, practices that contradicted church orthodoxy. So in the witch hunts, they also lumped in midwives and healers who practiced in a way that was threatening to church and patriarchal authority, because they were the people who could begin, end pregnancy, help it along. So that was one way. So all of their methods and techniques. So things that like herbalism, for example, which today is sometimes considered woo woo. Herbalism gets cast as not credible, not a viable practice. And then a few hundred years later, in around the 1500s, with the establishment of medical schools, that's a big one too, because of course women are shut out of the academy, and their healing methods, with taking care of mothers, with their knowledge of women's health, that's all again now just like rubbish, because it goes against the medical professional system, but also the humorism, which is, these different types of constitutions. This was the kind of leading medical notion since the ancient Greeks, where you have their types of phlegmatic. I'm forgetting them now. But anyway, women were always considered phlegmatic, which is to be the opposite of men. So women were, whereas men are rational and hard and angular. Women were soft, doughy, untrustworthy, leaky. There's things coming out of places. And so considered really irrational and susceptible, when you go back to the witch hunts, to the devil and all these things. So that putting an opposition of men to women, I think you really see that both in the witch hunts and in the establishment of medical schools, which again then paints anything that does not conform to this one thought system as something that just is a bunch of hooey.
Mm-hmm. So I also wanted to hear you write a little bit about, we're going to get to a few tips we want to leave people with to tap into their own intuition, but there's also things to look out for that can interfere with a person being able to pick up on what their own intuition is telling them. And you write a little bit about anxiety triggers connected to past traumas potentially interfering with,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you know, the intuitive signals. Can you say more about that intersection?
Yes. So there's a great book I recommend so much. It's called What My Bones Know by the journalist Stephanie Fu. And I think she does such a good job talking about this. So, and I interviewed her for the book, and she talked about her own personal experience to me, which is that, she grew up in a very abusive household. And so she said, because of how I was raised, I always think that people are mad at me. And that happens so fast that feels like intuition. So, an intuition and a trauma response can feel really similar in the sense that they happen very quickly. They often happen very viscerally, and they feel really true. So, she had this beautiful metaphor. She said, you touch the stove and you learn that it's hot. So, which hot stoves have you touched in your life? And so, again, depending on your personal experiences, that's going to color a lot of your worldview and your perception and all of this, which is not to like discredit or discount any of that. But, all of this is based on past experience. Intuition is pattern recognition based on past experience, based on expertise that happens incredibly quickly. So, just having some kind of awareness about what our pockets of trauma are, what our history is, what really sets us off. That's important to know, because that can kind of mimic intuition and sometimes might be very intuitive, but isn't always.
Mm-hmm. So we're gonna move to audience questions in a little bit, but before that, I wanna also celebrate. I just saw that you have some foreign rights deals to announce, and
Yeah.
this book is going to be going global in a lot of different countries, which is so exciting. Which made me think, like, what these readers around the world who might be receiving this book and at what time. I was wondering, like, what are your if you were to say, like, I hope this kind of person in these circumstances finds this book at the right time, what would you say? Like, who are your ideal readers or your dream readers for this book?
My ideal readers, I think, are women, but I think more than anything, it's people, again, who have been told from day one that they are not right. So going back to this male female split that has happened, for hundreds of years, where we're taught implicitly and explicitly that there's one way to be that's right, and that is straight, white, male, cis, et cetera, et cetera. And when you're not those things, I think that a lot of self-doubt gets inculcated. So to me, intuition has become synonymous with self-trust. So
Mm-hmm.
my hope would be for anyone to pick this up where they just want to learn to trust themselves and their own inner authority a little bit more, and to feel this as a homecoming and as something that is empowering, that we all possess, that you don't have to go buy somewhere. It's something that we
Mm-hmm.
all have. That's my hope.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And then one more thing before we open this to the audience. Tell us about how this book has changed you as a person now. And, if you had to sort of, writing this book was a chapter, now it's out in the world, and you're a different Liz and a different writer. So tell us more about that.
Different Liz.
Mhm.
Gosh, it's really changed me in so many ways. I mean, again, it's really, I really do know the difference between anxiety and intuition now. I have to relearn it every single day because I could really get swept away very easily. So that's a big one. That is just like I'm really like the everyday part of this title is the most important part to me because I think that my number one endorsement for developing your intuition is that it's fun and that this is a practice that you can just integrate into everyday life. It's not about, going on some silent retreat for weeks at a time. This is something that we can all do. And so, like, my little intuitive practices now, one of the things I started doing when I was researching this book was writing down my dreams and not to understand them. Like there's so many books out there that will help you interpret dreams. Carl Jung, we love him, great. But that's not what my thrust was. It was really again in differentiating anxiety and intuition. I'm a pretty vivid dreamer, so I will sometimes wake up really in some kind of aroused state from whatever the dream was, good, bad, and different. So before I get out of bed, I just like scrawl it, like incomprehensible language, just details of what the dream was. And that just has helped me clear from the night before and start fresh in the day so that I feel like I am more receptive and available to intuitions. So being in touch with my unconscious processes in this really pragmatic way has been super cool. And I think that self-trust piece, again, like developing intuition is like developing any skill. It's like you don't go to the gym once, it's something that you do consistently over time. And just doing these little check-ins, noticing. It's been fun to get to know myself in a new way. And I just feel like I can really trust myself a lot more than I did before. And maybe that's where that lack of imposter syndrome this time comes from. I don't know.
That's cool. Okay, so we're going to transition to audience questions. So if everyone wants to think of something, please put it in the chat. And we have a couple lined up here. So
Right.
Brooke has a question. Would you like to unmute yourself, Brooke, and ask your question?
Sure. I was wondering if there was one fun fact or nugget from your research that Liz finds herself sharing often.
Yes, great question. There is, and that's I just said this a few minutes ago, but the neuroscientific definition of intuition is pattern recognition based on expertise that happens incredibly quickly based on experience, and it happens like subperceptually in our bodies often. So for example, you walk into a room and you get a vibe from that room, and maybe that vibe is like you feel a clenching in your stomach because it's an icky room, or you feel like a drop in your shoulders because it's a nice room. You've been in rooms before, that's based on past experiences, and now you're getting a feeling about it. So the thing I like to remind people is that intuition is not this wacky out there thing. It is a culmination of everything that's ever happened to you. It's kind of one of the more grounded evolutionary adaptations and traits we have. And it's what keeps us safe and alive. And it's just very efficient. You don't have to walk into a room and stop and make a pro and con list. It just happens really fast. So to people who say they're not intuitive, I say you are, or you wouldn't be here. You really wouldn't. So we all have it, and it is very, very pragmatic.
Cool. Let's see, another question from Allison. Allison Gilbert, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sure, that would be great. Hey, Liz, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yay. I'm so happy for you. I'm just curious. I know that every decision seems so potentially fraught these days because there's just a hose of information that we could be exposed to that could sway our opinion and make us doubt ourselves. So I'm wondering, is struggling with intuition, do you think, historically harder today? Because we can second guess ourselves forever depending on what information we're seeking, whereas maybe decades ago, when information was less at our fingertips, it was easier to trust our intuition.
I think you are onto something, Allison Gilbert. I think that it has never been harder for us to trust ourselves and to hear our intuition. Absolutely, for the reasons you cited, that we're just kind of in this deluge of information coming at us all the time. So yesterday, for example, I still feel like I'm kind of recovering from a brain injury with the book coming out. Like I'm just like not all there. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna go for a walk in the park. That's a good thing to do. But as I was going for my walk, my medicinal self-care walk in the park, I'm fiddling with my phone, I'm looking at my messages, I'm like putting on a podcast, and I was like, no, like I don't have to do all of that. So we do live in a time where it's required of us, if we're from our jobs and communities to know a lot, but there's also these moments we find ourselves, or at least I find myself, where I am still I'm making choices that I don't have to. I can take that walk and try to shut out a little bit and find those pockets of quiet and stillness to really even like unscramble and hear what I actually think. And I think that if we are going to make it through this time somewhat intact, is so important for us to do that. And it's a discipline, and it doesn't feel comfortable because I think we are all so addicted to the cortisol and the dopamine and the lesser hormones that make us crazy. So I think that it is really hard these days to trust ourselves and find that quiet. But I think finding the quiet and the moment, the interstitial moments, again, you don't have to go on a meditation retreat for 2 weeks, but you can go for a walk without listening to a podcast.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I love that. Anne has a great question. Want to go ahead, Anne?
So you were talking about particularly women's intuition, and I love our long witchy history that is in some places celebrated and some places reviled. The list is so focused on building women's power and influence, and for our members and in the world, right? Like this is both. This is both micro and macro. But I'm interested if you have some from your research, like how we can sharpen our intuition in business. So um, because we have to move faster, but also because we're in such a weird data-driven moment. Like it feels like trust me or I'm trusting myself is not the vibe
Right.
that's happening. Also because
Totally.
yeah, there's just a lot of ways in which we are undermined and sidelined and separated from our own sense of power. So tell me more about how we can tap into our intuition, sharpen our intuition.
Great question. Um, Intuition is data, again, because it's based on prior experience. It's based on something. It's not coming out of nowhere. It's data. And I think that should be considered a piece of the puzzle, right? So you have your more Excel data on one side. You also have your intuition. And I don't think they necessarily, one needs to be considered bigger than the other. One of the things that drives me crazy is that we kind of trot intuition out at the highest stakes moments. So like, you're in some business decision deciding whether to, partner with someone or whatever it is. What does your gut say? Why should you trust your gut when you haven't been, practicing using it every single day? So I think that the best way we can sharpen our intuition in business and in any other setting is really to start small. I think that we need to become more willing to stop and check in with ourselves with questions like, which side of the street do I walk on, get really comfortable, get really confident in these smaller stakes decisions, that when the bigger decisions come, we know where that's coming from and we know that we can trust it. I think, you know, for women especially, like, to listen to their instincts is incredibly important. But again, thinking of it as a piece of the puzzle, and it's something that you don't have to act on either. I think there's also this conception that if you have an intuition about something, it's like life or death, you have to act on it, and you don't. So this is not a business example, but it's like an example that I think, you could kind of extrapolate out. A few months ago, my 3-year-old told me he stuck beads up his nose. And like, no one saw the beads go in there, but no one saw them come out either. We looked, there were no beads, but I didn't think there were beads up there. So I was like, I really don't think there are. But like, we're going to go to the doctor anyway, and we're going to get an x-ray anyway. But I can hear my intuition at that moment to say, like, well, I think it's okay, but I'm going to double check this with something else. So I think that it all works most harmoniously when we're kind of pairing these things together.
I got it. That's amazing. I love that story. There were no beads. There were no beads up there.
There were no beads. I mean, as far as the x-ray goes, it's really hard to give a 3-year-old an x-ray, turns out. But I don't think there were beads. Still, no one's seen beads so far.
I would love to see, I mean, I really do. The work that you're doing is so special because I would love to see more women trust themselves to make leaps. And also, if those leaps don't work, to trust that you'll fix it on the other side.
Exactly.
And
that's exactly it.
When I look at your list of all the Claires, Carolyn, we were chatting before we got on to say, what Claire are you? And when I saw them, like immediately, I feel like I'm the Claire empathy, where I can feel other people's feelings. And that starts to get in my own sense. I'm like, I know how, like, I can, I'm like so overly empathic that it occasionally requires me to, like, just like you said, less data. I need other people's feelings not to be in my own decision-making process. I need to trust my feelings about something. And sometimes that's hard to like pick apart, like, especially if those other people's feelings are important to me, right?
Totally. And what I'm
hard.
talking about is really like what you're talking about. This is a life's work. This is not something that, like, we can kind of master in 30 days. I mean, but really, I think building that awareness and naming it and taking these small steps to build boundaries around that is huge. And I think that when we begin to do that in these small daily ways, I really do think that the cascading effects in our own individual lives, but also collectively the power of women trusting themselves, where there are billion-dollar industries telling us every day how we're wrong and how we need to be fixed. I think it's really huge and powerful.
Because I have you, and because there's no other questions in the chat, I actually I'm gonna take my privilege here and ask you one more question. I'm so interested that you interviewed gastroenterologists for the trusting your gut. Will you say more about, like, literally what's happening in your gut and why your intuition feels like it's in your gut?
This is one of my favorite chapters and interviews. Thank you for asking that. So hundreds of millions of years ago, when we were just, single-celled organisms that wriggled up onto the shore, we were enteric nervous systems first. The enteric nervous system developed millennia before the central nervous system. This enteric nervous system is the only set of organs that can function like independently of the brain, like doing its own thing. And there's a ton of communication between the enteric nervous system and the central nervous system by way of the vagus nerve. That's the big nerve that connects them, that we often hear called into when we want to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, when we want to get out of fight or flight. There's a lot of vagus nerve activation things we can do. There are more nerve endings in the enteric nervous system, the set of organs comprising the gut, than there are in the spinal cord. So there's a lot happening in the enteric nervous system, and a lot of feelings, emotions, memories are stored in the gut. So when we say we're having a gut feeling about something, it's like quite literal. And then, more than 90% of serotonin is created in the gut, and only a very small part is created in the brain. So the gut has a lot to do with our whole emotional landscape. So a lot of the, feelings and sensations we have about certain stimuli, they do start, I don't know if anyone experiences this, but like you do start to feel like something going on in your gut. And that is information that like is important to listen to.
I love that.
It's really interesting. I mean, and have you learned anything? This is probably a little off topic, but like, did they talk at all about probiotics and like, and sort of fermented foods which are so, promoted and for other reasons? Can those help us with our intuition if we have more kimchi and kombucha?
I did wonder that, people do have lots of different opinions about this. Like I talked to some people who were like, "Oh my gosh, if you want to be intuitive, you have to be vegetarian because obvious reasons." I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I just don't want to stop eating burgers, I think. But the probiotics, I did hear a lot about that. I think that when you think about it in a more macro level, like gut health is so related to mental health. There are
Yeah.
so many studies that have shown that with the Mediterranean diet, with fish oil, all of that, about how these kinds of dietary changes can really alleviate symptoms of depression and anxiety. So I think that just on a more kind of like general level, that having good gut health just makes you feel good and makes you again more open to those inspirational, intuitive sparks than just feeling like crap all the time.
So other questions, please put them in the chat. Also, I would be curious if anyone wants to be a little vulnerable and share a moment of intuition that they had and either did follow it with a good outcome or didn't follow it and feel some regret. Anyone have a personal experience that they want to share? I know Liz has a lot and they're in the book, and also you talk about them. Do you have anything recently this week, Liz, that we may not know yet about your intuition kind of
Okay,
guiding
this
you
is
on
such a
launch week?
silly this is such a silly story, but again, like talk about having to learn these things every single day. On Wednesday, when I was just like weekend at Bernie's myself around, like I was truly a corpse on Wednesday. My sister and I were going to lunch, and we were down in Dumbo, and I was like, let's just go to Westville because that's where I always go. But part of me was like, don't go to Westfield, go get tacos. But I was like, but tacos doesn't make sense because we're going to have chicken for dinner. So I started getting very cognitive about this. So we went to Westville, hair in both of our meals.
Oh,
So
there you
I'm
go.
talking about everyday intuition, man. This is going to help you avoid contaminated food. I should have listened to it. I didn't. I still do not listen to my intuition at my own peril often. And every time it just reinforces, God, go get the tacos. Allison.
Yeah.
I have a fun marketing idea for you.
Ooh, do
So
tell.
I know we've been talking about work and workplace and a lot of professional things here. My two kids are both in their 20s, they're young adults, and they're both coupled up. However, I know their friends are in the dating world, and I'm thinking that young adults who swipe, swipe, swipe to go meet their partners really have trouble trusting their gut, trusting their intuition about dating. And so I'm wondering if there are organizations, companies like Match and Hinge and et cetera, that you can partner with where you can then talk about intuition in dating.
I love
love
it.
that.
I write about that in the book. I do, because it's such a
Okay,
hard
good.
place to hear
Yeah.
it. Yeah, but that's a great idea. Thank you. Let's talk further because I like
Yes.
that idea.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating. Can you share a little bit about the intuition and dating material in the book?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a mess. devastating.
Yeah.
You know, you are contending with so many messages. You're contending with society's messages about the kind of person that you should be attracted to. You're contending with your whole family constellation, upbringing, what you witnessed, what you saw modeled, like all of those inherited stories. It can be really hard to figure out. And here, then, yeah, Allison, as you suggest, like the whole technology component of it, which is just totally separating us from our instincts, our like person to person kind of humanity. So it's, and also, you know, when you're younger people, for younger people, it's hard. Like it's just really hard. You're still figuring out who you are, you know, you're still learning who you are and what you like. So it's a total mess. So I interviewed Orna Gerolden from couples
Mm.
therapy for that chapter, which was so much fun. And some other psychologists and therapists around how to figure all that stuff out. So whew, again, a life's work.
I love that. So we're about time to wrap up. If there's one last question, we can do that if anyone wants to unmute or put it in the chat. Otherwise, we will pass it to
Thank you
Anne.
all for coming
Yeah.
too. I just want to say thank you for spending your Friday lunch with me. I really appreciate it.
I want to wrap with one more question to you,
Great.
which is how can we help you?
Oh my God. Thank you, Anne. So tell everyone you know about this book. That's big. You know, it's so funny. My first book came out in 2016. The media landscape in 2025 is very different. You know, so getting coverage is tough. I mean, if there's so any coverage opportunities would be really helpful. And you know, as I did for the list a few months back, I'm working on developing a set of workshops around intuition that I would love to bring to businesses and to workplaces. So if this is something that you think could benefit your team or a team you know, intuition does touch every facet of human experience. So there's so many different ways to take it. Intuition for innovation, intuition for team development, all of that stuff. So I'm really trying to get that off the ground as well.
Amazing. All right, so here's everybody's marching orders. Buy a copy of the book for yourself. I've put the link in the chat. Buy a copy of the book for a friend or a mother because it's Mother's Day. Buy a copy just to leave for someone to find, right? Some magic intuition moment for them to find the book, a moment of serendipity. Then share it on social. Then give Liz 5 stars on Amazon. Don't buy the book on Amazon. Buy the book on buy the book. But if you buy the book on the link that I've put in, the list also benefits. So that's nice for us, an extra $2 or something. But it's a nice bonus for us. And then tell all your friends so that we can book Liz for corporate events and workshops and speaking, because really this is such a powerful conversation. I thank you so much, Liz, for having it. I thank you, Carolyn, for
Thank you,
guiding us.
Carolyn. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everyone, for coming. This was so fun.
And I'm going to get everybody off to their 2 o'clock meeting in time. Wishing you all happy
Awesome.
intuition.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Al. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.